there's going to be some good, valuable information for this one today. All right, welcome back. We are Game 3004. That's Mobile Game Dev 2 in the winter 2022 semester. I'll be okay. I'm probably not going to get that all semester long. And it's week 1, part 2 of our broadcast here at George Brown. And in the earlier part of the week on Tuesday, we did a short information session about what this course is about, orientation. We talked about a couple of things. We said that most of this course is a project-related course. So that's something that we're doing. One thing that I've asked all of you to do is kind of join up with teams and all that kind of stuff. And I've seen, if I go back up online now onto Blackboard, if we look at our groups, we can see that they're getting, we have some people that have joined. We have groups of 4, 5s, and 6s. We have one group of 3 that need to go up to a group of 4. So again, if you haven't signed up for your groups or for whatever reason haven't had a chance to do that, please do so as soon as possible, as your first part of your project, which is project part 1, your team contract, is due this week at the end of the week, and it's worth 5% of your final grade for your team. So we're going to be talking about some stuff that can help you along the way, and part of that is we're going to review agile project management best practices. Any questions or concerns about teams? Have you guys all connected with somebody? And one of my team members doesn't have Blackboard access yet, but will join once they have access. Okay, no problem. Hopefully they'll have that by the end of the week. Worst case scenario, please include them in your contract, and then we'll retroactively fix their mark. Michael says you need one more member. That's fine. So again, we're not using Discord this semester, Michael, but you can always go across. Discord is still available to you. You can always connect on Discord and ask anyone you want to join your team. Hopefully you'll get one more member. Worst case scenario, I can try and find a member for you, but I'd rather you do that on your own, because at the end of the day, it's better if you find your own teams compared to if I find one for you, by far, okay? All right. Okay. Let's continue. We'll go from there. So yeah, hopefully you guys are good with some of the things we're talking about. So team contract is what's due this week. Again, concept and in-game pitch is coming up the week after, or 2 weeks after, so week 3. And I'm going to talk about how you can start moving on and best practices for using things like meeting up with your peers and all that kind of stuff. So a couple things to note. Remember that this semester we have 1 hour for lecture and a couple hours for lab. And the expectation is when you fill out your contract document that you're going to select at least one other time to meet up with your team. I recommend two smaller periods to get together to discuss your game, to do some work together and so on. So I'm just recommending it. So please plan in your contract that there should be a couple times you meet, and that there should be, for the information that is relevant to your team, so that way you can kind of have the best outcome possible. Okay, hopefully that will be something that you are you're going to be working with this semester. So hopefully you're not going to be just, and this is what I'm hoping, you're not going to just meet on chat. Hopefully you can talk to each other on Discord or some other app. You can use Teams, you can use Zoom, you can use Google Meets, whatever you feel comfortable. But I highly recommend you at least talk and not just chat. People who just chat on Discord, I think, have a lot more challenges than if they talk and you can hear each other. And there shouldn't be any excuse on, I don't have a mic nowadays. Everyone should have a mic at this point. All right, yeah, so Josh, we just had Michael. He needs one more member, so maybe you want to join his team. All right, let's continue with the thing. So we talked about this, that the team. We talked about our schedule and how this week it's all around kind of an intro into 3D game development. We talked about what you're doing, and we also discussed 3 types of games you're able to make. You're able to make a platform runner shooter that's in 3D. You're able to create a game that is a tower defense game, and you're able to do a survival crafting game, some kind of voxel-based survival crafting game, okay? And it's 3D. So have any of you kind of zeroed in on any of those choices yet? I know this morning I talked to Kira. She says you're probably thinking about making a tower defense game. So Eric, you're covered. But what about the rest of you? Have you guys figured out what you're doing yet, or are you going to discuss it in a future meeting? So Liam says yes. Mandeep says yes, my group has. We are going to do with the tower defense game. Okay. Liam, what game are you making? So, because there's some complexities around all the games. I just also discussed tower defense with Eric. Okay, cool. So, so one of the things that you're going to see is each of those games is harder and harder complexity. All right. So Hardik says shooter platformer. That's fine, Hardik. And what I mean by harder complexity, the platformer shooter is probably the first level of complexity. They can be still a great game, and you can add a lot of features on the platformer runner shooter. And the tower defense game is definitely the next level of complexity. There's a lot of detail there. And you can also go one step higher. And we talked about this, how some people might think that the survival crafting game might be the hardest because you're procedurally generating your level, right? But sometimes people think, well, that's easier than actually doing a tower defense game. So it's kind of like 6 of one, half dozen of the other in terms of complexity. But I'm glad you guys are narrowing your focus and trying to decide what you're doing, because today we're going to be reviewing project management methods, things that we've talked about in the past that maybe you've forgotten or you haven't zeroed in on for a long time. So let's talk about this review, kind of in a quick, straightforward way. And I'll also take questions from you guys with regards to how to manage your team and so on. Remember, before we start, that my expectations are that there are a number of specialty roles that you can assign yourself in one of your teams. The 3 that are required from you guys are lead software engineer, game designer, and game producer. Those you should have. The other ones, like a UI programmer, a generalist programmer, a technical artist, an audio engineer, and so on, those are optional. And sometimes what teams do is they run with those specialist roles, or they have the big 3, game producer, game designer, and lead software engineer, and they have everyone else be a generalist. However you do it is up to you, but the one thing that I've asked you not to do is please do not combine game designer with a game producer, or a game producer with a lead software engineer. The big 3 cannot be combined. And the reason why is because there's so much work for each of them to do, especially the game producer, as you'll see. So remember, we talked about this way back in first semester. We said, teams were smaller before, and now they're bigger. And because of that, we have to use more formal software engineering type utilities to manage projects. And we want to be able to manage the development lifecycle of a project with different tools. And before, we used to use something called a waterfall type project manager. This is kind of like, kind of going back. So project management, which is kind of like a waterfall. First you do your concept, and then before you do your design, your concept is done, then your code, then you do assets, and so on. And the problem with this kind of waterfall philosophy for software engineering for games is that there's a lot of uncertainty we talked about in first semester, and that this doesn't quite work. A lot of times we pivot, we do some work, and then we kind of shift directions a little bit. And the reason why we shift directions is because there's so much to do, right, when it comes to how we manage a project. And sometimes we still don't really understand what the game is going to look like until the very end. So, the old way to do it would be something like this. We have a milestone, another milestone, another milestone, and then we're marching our way towards a goal. We don't have milestones anymore. We have more like iterations. And a lot of times when we march toward a goal, we realize, you know what, we're not going to get to this goal because we're way far away. We maybe have to make a change request. Or you know what, it's just not fun. The game we're making is, we've planned it, but we're marching along, and we're on rails, and we know no agency whatsoever to do anything else other than what we planned. This isn't working. And it really didn't work. It cost a lot more money doing it this way than using Agile. And Agile is a little faster. That's why, not just Agile faster for making a game fun and software engineering, but actually we produce code a lot faster. Because remember, what we're doing here is we do a lot of upfront planning and designing before we code anything, right? And that's not really what we do as much by using Agile. Agile is, we have a pre-production phase, and then we do kind of we're right into production, kind of thing, more or less. We have a concept phase too, but it's not like this. And a lot of times it's kind of mixed together. So the Agile Manifesto is something that guides us when it comes to how we're going to do Agile project management. And I've displayed it here. Again, this is just a review. But really what we want to try and do is go from a level of very high uncertainty when we start off in the concept phase to a level of lower uncertainty as we're, tuning, debugging, and in post-production mode, okay? So we really don't know what our game is like right now, but eventually we will know a lot more about it, okay? That's the idea, the concept, or the philosophy behind everything. We can also think about it like this. Right now, you might be way out here in prototype land, right? When you really don't understand your game. There's a lot of technical uncertainty. There's a lot of game design uncertainty out here. And as you move into pre-production and then into production, you start becoming more certain as the type of game you're creating. So there's a lot of different development stages, which we know. I've had this PowerPoint up online for you, for your reference. But a lot of times it's not just so clear cut. It's not like we're moving from one phase into the other. The concept phase kind of leaks across all the phases, and the reason for this is because of that pivot that I was talking about earlier. We start off and we think we're making a particular game, and then we're like, this just, it's not fun. We got to make some changes here, or, we got to change our concept a little bit, or, someone else is doing the exact same game as we are. We want to pivot just a little bit to make our game slightly different than theirs, right? And the same thing goes with pre-production. Pre-production can change a lot, and we can do more planning and adjustment every iteration, almost like a little mini sprint or a mini waterfall, especially when we're not really experienced. We do some planning within each sprint in order for us to produce things properly, and that happens all the way into post-production, right? So we kind of smash things together. It's not like one phase depends necessarily on another phase and another phase. I mean, sure, we need to do our concept, which is what you're doing right now, but it's going to continue, right? That's the idea behind it. So it kind of looks more like this and not like this. It's not like a severe break from pre-production into production. It's more like one thing phases into another thing. It transitions. And one of the things we always want to talk about is the ability for us to find the fun first. So some of that requires things like prototyping, getting some placeholder assets, putting it into place and checking it out and see if it's working okay. Sometimes it requires us to do things like prototyping in the form of tabletop role-playing or tabletop, kind of paper prototyping where we actually have no code whatsoever and we just have something that's representative on a tabletop, almost like a board game, and we get the fun. We try and understand the mechanics before we code anything at all. And then we might do a digital prototype, and finally we start coding the actual game. Now, in our case, we only have 2 short weeks before you actually do your concept, and 3 short weeks before you actually do your first playable. So at the end of the day, you don't have a lot of time for all this. So what I want you to do is try and be as efficient as possible to come up with a concept for what you're doing based on the requirements that I've given you this semester for the game type that you're doing, as well as the common requirements that everybody has to do. So one thing that we also kind of think about is this idea of chain of communication and chain of command. When it comes to communicating with everybody, I'm going to be using the project lead, in this case, the producer of your team, as a single point of contact. They're going to work with the lead programmer and the lead technical artist and the lead's game designer and every other lead, and we're going to talk to everybody. Now, typically, you don't have a big team. It's not like you have a team of 10 people like we did in first semester, first year. Here, you're going to have a smaller team, between 4 and 6 people of high performance individuals. You probably know each other now after being together and working side by side, whether it's remote or in person, for at least a couple of years, right? So this is like kind of like your last semester where I have a chance to see you in action, right? So you know who you're working with. So again, please pick people that you really want to work with in your team and that you can communicate with well. So the way it works, remember this little diagram, you may have remembered to see this in first year, first semester, where we have an iteration, and as we iterate, we continue to pivot. We don't go in a straight direction a lot of times, and sometimes we have a lofty goal and we don't quite meet that goal, but we get to something that's equally as fun or even more fun than what we thought when we first started, right? We thought we wanted to go here, but actually we want to turn and go this way. And that's perfectly fine. That's what Agile allows us to do from one iteration to the other. One other way of thinking about an iteration is we're closer and closer to a shippable game. The Agile development workflow works like this. You have some stakeholders as well as a product owner. In this case, the product owner is, you can consider that all of you are the product owners, but you can also say that I'm the product owner because, or the Scrum Master, however you want to put it, I'm in there somewhere. And at the end of the day, what you want to do is produce a product backlog. Remember what a product backlog is a set of all the features that you're going to have in the game. Some of them that I've given you, right? Some requirements, and some that you're going to give yourself. And these features are going to take the form of user stories, right? User stories are going to be kind of played out like, as a player, I would like to have whatever feature, so that I can accomplish whatever benefit. And there's got to be a way of, kind of measuring that this has been done. So confirm that this thing has been done. And that's a user story for the most part. And you're going to create a bunch of user stories, which is a better way of doing it than just a bunch of tasks. User stories gives us the opportunity to be more creative. We're more abstract in some ways. And then we can break down a set of tasks that kind of tie into the user story. So these user stories, our team is going to have a series of sprints. Normally in real life, you have a number of sprints for every release. And then you have an improved game at the end, and you continue to iterate this process by knocking things off the product backlog, every iteration. So again, we work through a number of releases from concept to pre-production to production to post-production. For you guys, of course, you don't have this many releases, and your release size and the time frame is usually one release, one sprint. Normally, a sprint is 2 to 4 weeks, and a little iteration, and a release is 2 to 4 months. You guys don't have 2 to 4 months for each release. You have one release, one sprint. And in 14 weeks of time, and not including the break that we're going to have in the middle. So really, it's not a lot of time to produce a little game. But the great thing is you have a number of people, and the game scope is small enough, or should be small enough, that you can do something really neat by the end of semester. Again, to reiterate, when you're getting together with your team, you're really far from agreement with your team what the heck you're making. And also, you're really far from certainty about what the game is about, right? And so you're here in anarchy land right now. You don't really know what's happening. You're not really agreeing what the game is about. And as you start concepting, you come closer and closer to understanding what the game is. And it becomes really simple to discuss in post-production, right? Hey, this is our game. Because you know what it is, right? It's complicated when you're going from production to post-production because there's a lot of details. But once you've actually produced the game, or you're marketing it, it's a lot simpler to discuss. You really understand what the game is, and you're much closer to agreement about what you've made. It's very kind of philosophical, but actually really kind of interesting and logical as well. So how do we do Agile, right? So Agile, again, you have a series of iterations. A lot of times we use Scrum. So we use sprints, and it's usually 2 to 4 weeks. For you, most of the time, it's going to be 2 weeks for every sprint, typically. Okay. And again, you're going to have a bunch of features that you're going to develop over that iteration. And we're going to talk about these as user stories, like we said. Okay. These are the iterations we talked about before. And here's the big picture. So when you start off, right, you start these set of sprints, you do a sprint plan, right? And actually what I'd like you guys to think about is when you get together with your meetings for your contract, you're going to do a release plan. Remember what we said is, I'm just going to skip out to the earlier pages because now we're at page 34. Let's just skip way back out here to the release plan again. So here's the release plan that we have for you, right? I said, look, you're going to have a series of releases. Your first playable release, your alpha release, your beta release, and your final release. So 4 releases to do everything. Your first playable is where you find the fun of the game, and it's a proof of concept. Think about this as a minimum viable product at this point, something that makes sense. If you're going to do a mechanic, you're going to show it off here, some special mechanic, as much as possible. Okay, and that's due week 4, so 3 short weeks from now. Again, you have a concept that you're doing. At the same time, you're doing your first sprint or first iteration. Okay, so that's what's happening here. So let's move forward. So then in the big picture, you plan your releases, and each release has a sprint. What are you doing in each sprint? Well, what you want to do in each sprint is you want to set up a tool to help you out to manage your sprint. And what I talked about earlier today is what I'm going to draw again. Let's suppose we have our project. So our project might be all of this, and this might be your task board, okay? And the first part of your task board way over here, whether you're using Jira or Trello or GitHub projects or whatever you're going to use, again, I prefer that you use Trello or Jira. Jira is going to be better for you from a resume perspective to know. But let's suppose this is your product backlog. Okay, so this is where we start. And your product backlog is going to have all the features for your entire game. So all features for your game, right? And then again, this is in user story format. Okay, that's what you want to do. And let's just turn that over here like this. There we go, something like that. And put that over there. Yeah, there. Good enough. So that is your product backlog. And some people say, like, how do I get these features? Well, the first thing you do is when your first meeting, you start thinking about all the things I've given you, right? Start writing those down in user story format and all the things that you want to do, right? Put those all down in a prioritized list. Okay, that's what it is. And then what you want to do is as you do your first release, right, which is your first sprint, you're going to have your sprint backlog. Okay, so here you have another backlog, right? I'm just going to make it a little thinner so we can fit everything. This is your sprint backlog. Okay, your sprint backlog is a subset, right, of all the features from your product backlog. So subset of features from product backlog that you believe is achievable. That's what you want, okay? That's what you want in here. And that's all the stuff that you can do. Some of it is also things that I've told you have to do. So that's a subset of all the stuff. So you take some from here and you put it in here, okay? And then you have another column typically in your project management that is your in progress column. So this is in progress. So this is where you have removed features in priority order. And by the way, one thing that I was asked this morning was like, how do I manage this stuff? You know, like, what I said was everybody is responsible from pulling features from the sprint backlog into in progress. Everybody. It's not just the producer's task. The producer is going to look to the rest of the team and say, hey, I have a feature in the sprint backlog no one's picked up. Can someone grab it? And if no one can grab it, the producer's going to grab it. Because remember, for us, the producer is also a programmer. Okay, so they're not someone that's going to avoid or not do the work, right? They're also involved in programming. So that's in progress. All the tasks that you've pulled into, in here one at a time. When a person is pulling a task here that's prioritized and they think it's done, they're going to put it inside of a testing column. They're going to pull it in something called testing, also called the verification column, testing or verify. The testing or verify column that you pull it into, right, can also, it's going to be tested by somebody else. If Tom pulls an object from, or a feature from the sprint backlog and pulls it into in progress, and they're working on it, Tom's working on it, and they think it's kind of complete, so they put it into the testing column. Tom's not going to test it. They've already pre-tested it. The people who should look at the stuff in the testing column are the game designer, to make sure that the feature matches the requirements in the game design document, right? As well as somebody else. Somebody else should look at it and basically cross-check to see that, yes, indeed, this feature is complete in the way that we want it to be completed. When that's happening, when we verify that the feature is complete, then what we can do is we can put it inside of the done column, okay? Let's put it in the done column. But sometimes before the done column, we might have a blocked column. And the block column is going to be there if we just cannot create a feature for some reason. Maybe it's because we don't know how to do it. It's a technical issue. Or maybe it's because a resource that was supposed to do the feature is no longer with us. They can't do it, or they've left the team, or whatever. And so no one has the expertise to do that anymore, or maybe the will. So we don't do that feature anymore. And so what happens is, or we can't do that feature for this sprint. We put it back into the backlog, into the product backlog, and it's going to be a higher priority item that's going to be pulled into the next sprint backlog, so we can get it done the next time. Okay, so blocked is also a viable column. And then you might have, if everything goes well, the done column finally. And the done column is done for the sprint. Okay, so this is the done column. And what about when you're done, you kind of collect all these items. You can take a snapshot of where you were when you first started and where you finished, when you stopped the sprint, right? Here's all the stuff you did. Here are the things that were blocked as an example. And then finally, you might have another column, which is product complete or feature complete. So that is where, the completed column might be for the entire project. Okay, and I'm going to kind of feature this up as well. So imagine if you have another column that's over here, and it's the completed column. You can also look at this as the archive, or the closed features, or whatever you want to call it. Sometimes called completed or archived or closed. And the reason why we do this is because we say, okay, anything that's been in completed, that means we've gone through the whole sprint process. We've put it in the done column, so we make sure all the things we want to do is in done, and then we finally put it in the completed column. And then when we go do the next sprint, we clean all this up. We remove everything from the sprint backlog. It's already been removed, hopefully, and either put it inside of blocked or done. We take anything that's in done and put it in completed. We put anything blocked back inside the product backlog, or leave it there if we can never get it done because it's a technical issue we don't know how to do, or we don't have anyone that can do that, whatever that is. Typically, we don't want to have things in here, okay? And then we go back to the product backlog for the next sprint and fill the sprint backlog up again with new stuff for that iteration. Can you keep doing that over and over again? Questions around the task board and how it's useful. Again, this is review, guys. Hopefully it's not something that's new. You've seen this before. All I'm doing is just reviewing the expectations from you guys. All right, so that's the big picture, and it's exactly just like this. Here's the product backlog. Sprint is a subset of the product backlog. You have an iteration that lasts 2 to 4 weeks, and you have typically daily scrums. Now, this is a difficult thing for us to do as students, and I've done it in the past, but it's not like this course is the only course that you're doing. You're doing other courses, other projects, and so on. So doing a daily scrum just for this course, really not realistic, right? In fact, that's why I say you should probably have a couple of touch points a week where the producer kind of connects with everybody and says, hey guys, how are we doing? And they should look at the product, the task board and say, I see that you're still working on this thing, Chris or Liam or whatever. And, as an example, do you need any help? Or are you doing okay? It's taken a little longer than what we estimated in the beginning, because remember that each of the products in the product backlog, each of the features, has an estimate associated with it, right? We want to kind of come up with our best guess on how long this thing is going to take to make. And so what you want to get a sense of is how many hours that each feature is going to take. And if it's taken longer than the estimated time, you need to follow up. You need to follow up and say, do you need extra help? Are you over the time frame? Do you think you're going to finish anytime soon? And it's not like the producer has to be a nag, but they have to kind of look after it, or else you're going to miss your deadlines, right? Which is really, really bad. At the end of your sprint, every cycle, every 2 to 4 weeks, you have a potentially shippable game. Again, from a feature perspective, you kind of say, well, the player can jump. That could be a kind of a shortened version of a user story. And then you can kind of estimate the total work involved to make the player jump with animations and gameplay and a bunch of other stuff. Typically, you can see here there's quite a few hours that we've anticipated for a player jumping. And we talked about daily Scrum. It's usually something that's time boxed. So if you're going to do any kind of checkpoint or whatever throughout the week, make sure it's maximum 15 minutes and that you're super focused on the information that you're sharing. So you connect on Discord, you talk for 10 or 15 minutes, you have an action plan, and then you move away. All right, so you don't take up people's time, because everyone's time is valuable, especially when you want them to do their work. So the idea of time boxing is there so that we don't waste time, so we're efficient. At the end of the sprint, so you've done your sprint, you're going to do a bit of a retrospective, right? And this is something that a lot of teams miss. They just go, okay, we're done, let's move to the next thing. And there is no retrospective. What you want to do is you want to look at your sprint goals, you look at your roadmap for the entire project and say, okay, so, these things, these features that we wanted to target, how do we do, right? What's our status right now? And again, you can see that this is broken down into several minutes, a time box meeting for your sprint retrospective, right? You do a bit of a live demo to the entire team and say, hey, here's how things are working. Again, maximum 15 minutes to go through the game in its current state. And then another 3 minutes for some statistics. You look at your burn down chart, maybe your velocity chart, those kind of things, to kind of indicate, hey, where you are in terms of the entire project, okay? And then finally, you talk about your impediments, things that slowed you down or risk to the project. And then you get feedback. You get some feedback from the team, and you take it out, you take it back. One of the problems that people that ask is, how do I set up an organized meeting? How do I be organized when I'm a producer? And the thing I always say is, when you're making a meeting, first of all, book it on Outlook. That's the number one thing you want to do. Every meeting that you have with your team should be booked on Outlook or Google Calendar or whatever calendaring system you want. Again, the golden rule is, if it's not scheduled, it's not going to get done. So make sure you schedule this thing, right? Because people are going to forget. If it's in your Outlook, there's no excuse. You can't say, well, I forgot. Because the people who schedule your meeting together with you, they should put, kind of a warning or an alert that says, hey, your Scrum meeting, your weekly or semi-weekly meeting with your team is happening in 15 minutes. It's coming, right? So you should know about it before you go. Also, make sure that the time frame works for you. If the time frame is not going to work for you, or you're not going to attend your meeting, don't ghost your team. Don't disappear. Don't become invisible on Discord or some other system. Let them know you can't attend. There's a reason why you can't attend. If you continuously are not available, right, that's an indication that maybe something's going to happen with you and the team, because you're not producing. If you can't make your meetings, a lot of times you can't produce either, right? Your meeting is kind of the easiest thing to kind of, be part of. Be there, communicate, add in your 2 cents, all that kind of stuff. And then take that away and actually do something. Sometimes we have working meetings as well, where we're working together in a chat session. We're saying, yeah, God, I can't get this done. Can you help me out here? Can you take a look at my screen? I don't know exactly how to do this. And you work with somebody else, and almost like a pair programming capability where you're working together. So there's different kinds of meetings you're going to have. But again, make sure you time box everything so that you don't waste time. Because meetings, my friends, are some of the biggest impediments to your progress. Okay, you don't want to waste time with meetings. So when you do your sprint retrospective, the things that you want to think about is what worked well, what could be improved, what will we commit to doing in the next sprint, how we're going to do things differently, as an example. And, you know, Scrum team members make actionable commitments, things that they can change, that they can do differently than the last time. Maybe meet more often, or, you know, give status more often, or go on the task board and update the task board more times, or whatever it's going to be, because people need to know, you know, what's happening. And remember, the task board is super important because it's a communication tool. So Scrum principles, let's talk about that a little bit. So again, it's some best practices we're going to be talking about. I put the, you know, the details here. Everything from time boxing to prioritization to self-organization. Those are really cool principles and important ones. Prioritization is important because we want to prioritize the backlog items that we want to work on. Okay, that's important. And self-organization means your small little team is going to be self-organized. I'm not going to follow you or trying to, you know, figure out what you're doing. We're just going to have certain checkpoints a number of times. Whereas in previous times, back in the day, we had a micromanager that would watch the team every moment of every day to make sure that everyone was productive. Today, in this day and age, that's not productive for us to have a micromanager. Okay. So let's think about Scrum components. I've included that old video, Scrum in 10 minutes. I think still a good video to remind you guys how to do some estimation for each of your product backlog items. So take a look at this if you've forgotten. It's a cool little video, and I think it'll put you back on track in terms of how to do Scrum. But really the way it works is your product backlog is prioritized, and what you want to do is you want to select elements from your product backlog to put into your sprints. Each sprint should have a goal, so something that you want to get out of it, and really what it represents is vertical slices of functionality that you want to demonstrate, and you're getting closer and closer to a shippable game again. So when you do your sprint planning, you start thinking about what you're going to do. You reinforce this with your daily scrums. Again, tough for us to do, but at least a couple touch points a week is what I recommend. Then you do a sprint review and a retrospective. Sprint review is with your little team. A retrospective is usually with your stakeholders. Okay, I'm just going to move on to some of the stuff that we talked about. When you are less experienced in doing sprints, what ends up happening is you do something more like sequential development because you're not really experienced at working together. I kind of liken it to if you're playing a role-playing game, a tabletop role-playing game like Dungeons and Dragons for the first time, or even if you're doing something online and you have a player or a character and you're working together for the first time. Unless you're really focused, you know, you can die pretty easily actually. And the reason for that is unless you work together, if everyone goes off in different directions, if you split the party, a lot of times it can really be bad, right? And so I kind of liken it to the same thing when it comes to being inexperienced as a team for the first time. A lot of times we really chunk along sequentially. We do some design for the sprint. We do coding and assets. We commit and integrate. So have some kind of merging party, a merge party, as an example, and then we test and tune at the end. And this kind of is in a sequential way. We have dependencies. One thing depends on another thing because we really don't know how to work together, right? And actually, this comes into in line with Tuckman's, model for team formation and development. Remember the Tuckman's development? We have forming, norming, storming, performing, and adjourning. Those words. So right now you're in the forming stage, right? Because you're getting together. And even though you might have worked with these people before, there's probably going to be a bit of some storming where you kind of, try and figure out what all of you are doing and who's doing what and who's in charge and all that stuff again. Some people may have stepped up this time around that didn't step up last time. And they're going to be the producer for this time around, right? So that might be different for you. And so you're going to go through these phases of, less efficiency and lower productivity. And then you're going to go up as you get into a normal state, a performing state where you're actually doing stuff. And so we can move away from something that's very sequential and chunky like this, and it's something that kind of mixes together. So where we kind of do design and we do a bit of coding, and we trust each other, so we know that the dependency is going to be met. We don't have to wait for someone to finish before we start something else because we know it's coming, right? This is for experienced teams where we do parallel development as opposed to sequential development. It takes time to get there, and it may not happen this semester because, again, you guys are reforming your team. But in the real world, a lot of times we work together. That's why I always say one of the golden rules, again, is always keep a good team together because they're always able to produce more because you know each other. You can trust each other. You're friends. So again, our releases are a set of sprints, 2 to 4 months. We talked about that before. And it looks like our releases are a subset of our product backlog, and sprint goals are a kind of a subset of our release plan, and so on. One thing that we talked about is this idea of a Scrum Master. And again, master is not a great word these days, but think about that as someone who's a Scrum Ambassador, a person who supports Agile and Scrum through the organization and make sure that everybody in each team is doing things in an Agile way. That's probably me. I'm probably your Scrum Master for this semester. And I want to make sure that that's why I'm talking about Agile today, to kind of remind you of what it's like to be on that bandwagon, to do things in iterations and sprints, okay? And the product owner, a lot of times, is either known as the producer, or it could be somebody else in the organization. But it could be all of you. You guys are all product owners as well, but you're also, programmers or technical artists or testers or whatever, right, or designers. You also, a lot of times, have external customers and stakeholders, right, that care, the publisher and the studio executives. So one thing that we want to have a Scrum Master, or I like to call them a Scrum Ambassador these days, is what they do is they ensure impediments are addressed, so risks to the project, and they monitor progress at a higher level, right? They facilitate planning, reviews, retrospectives. They encourage continual improvement because that's what Agile is all about. And they help stakeholders and teams communicate with each other. Okay, that's what they do. So here's some impediments, which are called the silent killers of Agile teams. Bugs that crash the game or tools, that's an impediment, right? Excessive or long meetings that don't produce results, right? Constant distractions or interruptions. And let's say, for example, it's not just a frequently used intercom as an example nowadays because we're not in the same building, but what about if it's someone who's always memeing on Discord or who's fooling around? They're trying to make jokes or whatever, and they're not serious, they're not working on their stuff, and they continuously, kind of distract people by asking them to play games or doing other things. We don't want that kind of noise when we're doing work together. So, and there's nothing worse than someone not attending your meeting, and when you're looking at their Steam profile, you're seeing that they're playing some game. It's the worst thing ever. You feel terrible. They're ghosting you in your meeting, but they're playing some game on Steam. It's a terrible thing, right? So these are all impediments. They add risk to your project being completed. And the other one is waiting for someone to finish something you need to make progress on your task, a dependency. You've been trusting this person to get these things done, and they're just not getting it done. All right, so it's not a great feeling for that as well. The burn down chart is a communication tool, and what it does is it kind of displays all the hours that are remaining for your sprint, right? And the number of sprint days that are left. A lot of times, if you have 2 weeks left, that means there's 14 sprint days, if you think about that, 2 calendar weeks. And in those calendar weeks, how many hours of work can you allocate per day? That's the thing that you got to think about. Is it 1 hour, 2 hours, half an hour? You guys should get together and talk about that. Is it twice a week you're going to be working? Are you going to be working on the weekends? Are you not working on the weekends? Do you have a work schedule that you have to attend? I mean, there is money requirements nowadays, even with COVID. So how are you doing stuff? And what about accommodating people who are sick or accommodating people who have to work on more hours than you? What job roles can you give them? How can they still be productive with the stuff that they're doing? And how many hours do you have left? The burn down chart is really awesome because it communicates all the work that you have left for that particular sprint. The problem with a burn down chart is it also points to, it's a good thing and a bad thing. It's kind of a two-edged sword because it says, here's the trend, right? It looks like we're not going to make our sprint goal because we're way out here. What we really want to do is be down here, but we're way over here. So what do we got to do to make this difference? Crunch, right? And so a lot of times people use these communication tools in the wrong way, and we see it in the industry all the time, where Agile is kind of one of the underlying reasons for crunch, right? Because we look at a burn down chart or, a velocity chart, and we're looking at it and saying, look at that sprint velocity. We're really not doing well here. We need to speed up. We need to throw more resources. Or can you use help, guys? You have a team of 6 people. Can I give you another person so you can work faster because you're going to miss your goal? Or can you work overtime at night? I'll feed you pizza and beer all night long until you're done. Hopefully not beer, because beer will make you guys fall asleep. But anyways, that's the idea behind it, right? So it can be a positive and negative. We talked about the task board. Originally, back in the day, as a review, we had task boards that were physical. We had a room that was the project room. And inside that project room is exactly what you saw. You had a task board, and it was literally a task board, a physical task board with sticky notes. And we would go in there and we put the sticky notes on the board, and we would move the sticky notes because each sticky note would represent a task, a user story, and we'd move a sticky note from one place to the other. Sometimes we'd have to rewrite the sticky note, and because the sticky note would not stick anymore. And we'd have a burn down chart kind of at the bottom somewhere that would be manually made, so like with a marker, to show us how many hours were completed yesterday, right? And how many hours are left, right? People would do that. There would be people manually updating things. And you might think that's really archaic, but actually it worked. It was very manual, but people were engaged. We were in the same room together a lot of times. Every single morning we'd go into that room, right, as an example. And every single morning we'd have a 15-minute, kind of stand-up meeting that we'd have that was time-boxed, and we would talk about the things we did and the things we didn't do. And the hardest thing to come up with when you're in a meeting of a bunch of people, 15 minutes in the morning, and guys, we were meeting at 7:30 in the morning every morning, before work, before coffee, before everything. We'd had our meeting, right? We weren't even allowed to go to coffee before we got to the meeting. 7:30, we'd have to get there and talk to people. And that 15 minutes, man, you were on the hot seat if you didn't have your stuff done or if you were behind, right? So a lot of pressure. But the great thing was you created a lot of really great code. So nowadays, of course, it's digital, and some of the columns that I talked about are the ones that I recommend. I've also put it here inside the PowerPoint so you can remember. And of course, user stories are a format that we want to adhere to. So again, as a user, I want whatever the goal is so that I can do whatever. And here's some examples of stuff we've seen before, right? So when you write a user story, we want to define your end user. Who is it? Is it the player? Is it an internal user? Is it a stakeholder? Who are they? And what do they want? What's the benefit? And how do we make sure that we should write the acceptance criteria, right? And acceptance criteria is like measures. How do I measure that this thing has been completed properly? How do I know that this works? Is it fun? That could be an acceptance criteria. But then you got to analyze it. Is it challenging? Is it fun? Does it take 3 seconds to complete, 5 minutes to complete? What does it do in order for you to do that thing, to complete your story, to make sure that you can guarantee if someone looks at it that it looks good? Does it have to be efficient? Does it have to be small? Does it have to be big? What is it that you're making? And these are all things that you can add into your acceptance criteria for your user story. So here's some of them. As a player, I want a player mute button so that I stop being distracted by some of the other players online. Okay? And there's other ones we can think about as well. Again, you can have very big user stories we've talked about before. They become epics, and you want to break those bigger user stories down into sub-user stories, smaller user stories that you can chunk away. You can create subtasks or a work breakdown structure, WBS, for each of the user stories, like a little checklist of things that you've done. One thing that you're going to notice with Sprint and Agile is that you're in continual planning mode. You're constantly planning. And you have your release plan, your sprint goal, and all these future releases. And remember that even though you're in planning mode, what you want to do is keep yourself, I hate to say this, agile and flexible, and allow yourself, and this is really challenging for teams, to pivot. Sometimes the pivot is extreme. I know I've worked with, kind of producers in the past where we've butted heads. I've kind of said, like, why are we changing this? And I'm talking like major changes, like we're changing the whole narrative. The whole narrative is out the window. It doesn't work, right? or we're changing the 4 of the 5 game mechanics, like major changes we're talking about, right? That's more than a pivot, guys. If you make that many changes and you're pivoting that much, your game design document is terrible. Yeah. Like, what were you doing when you were planning stuff? Where did you get agreement with to make your game design document in the first place? And all of you know very well how to manage your game design document, because last semester I had each of you make a game design document for your individual games that you're doing, right? So it shouldn't be out of scope. You know that game design document. And if you were so far away from agreement and that's what's happened, and now you're making all these changes, right? It comes from a bunch of different possibilities. One, someone's really unhappy with the way the game is going, all right? If you're making all these, kind of crazy changes, big changes. Or two, the game that you thought was fun is really not fun, right? You've played it and you're like, wow, this is terrible, actually. I thought it was going to be fun, but we can't, we don't have a proof of concept. It doesn't work. So that's the time you make major changes. Sometimes, depending on how wide or how aggressive your pivot is, it might cancel your project in real life, right? Because it's that aggressive. It's that, you're changing assets, you're changing your aesthetics, you're changing your mechanics. Damn, you're making a brand new game, right? And you need to get that approved. So let's talk about Agile Tools again. We talked about them at the beginning. Again, the 3 that are very common these days are GitHub projects, which is on the rise, believe it or not. Agile tools like Trello, which is kind of the baby brother of Jira. And I would say, again, if I was going to recommend anything, learn Jira. Jira has a lot of tools built into it. It has, kind of burn down charts. It has Kanban boards. It has communication tools. It can be extended, and I believe it's still free for up to 10 people, right? At this point. So take a look at it. I don't think there's a cost to it at this point. And I know, I believe at one point it was, I think $10 for 10 people per month. So like $10 every month, but it covered 10 people. And that was like the top of its cost. And I think they've dropped it since then. One thing to note is if you really love this stuff and you see yourself more of a producer and a project manager compared to a coder or a designer, and sometimes you'll land there, you may want to think about, kind of looking at the Project Management Institute. So the PMI, they're the main, kind of association, if you will, they're accredited, and they kind of, allow you to certify with your project management certification. You can do a PMP as well as a certification specifically for Agile and Scrum. And there's a lot of demand for project managers still out there because people need to be organized, and I don't think that role is ever going to go away. So if you're interested, then please look it up. I think courses like this and other courses that you've done in the past qualify for, because it's not exactly a project management course, but they qualify you for X number of hours of to get your PMP. And one of the resources we want to talk about is this, which is the book that I've used to create this PowerPoint presentation, which is Agile Game Development with Scrum. I think it's still a very relevant book when it comes to game development. So a lot of the stuff that I've shared with you in this PowerPoint is I've kind of extracted the meat and potatoes, if you will, and put it inside the PowerPoint so you don't have to read the book. But I think there's still a lot of knowledge that I couldn't cover because, it's a book. And there's tons and tons of stuff here that you can kind of look at. So please keep this in mind. I think it's an awesome book to take a look at. Any questions around the review? I wanted to get this review done because I know a lot of you haven't touched Agile or even done formalized, project management for at least a couple of semesters. Questions at all, guys? All right, let's do one thing before we go for the day then. I want to take a look at the contract. All right, so the contract document, I want to briefly look at that. I know that you guys know about contracts, that this is not your first one that you've ever looked at or done. One thing to note is that, again, make sure you select a team name and put that in there. Your names and student IDs of all your members should be here too, as well as your email at minimum. You should also, in your contract, kind of indicate meeting times. And again, I recommend at least 2 a week is what I recommend. And other requirements, people ask, well, like, what if I wanted to take this sample expectation? Can I use it? Sure, you can, but you can add other expectations and other requirements in here as well. You can also add language in your contract for intellectual property. I mean, you guys are in the last semester, in the last year of study at George Brown. There is a possibility that you might be able to take this game further, right? Or maybe one of you might really love what you're doing and want to take it further. So I recommend you put language in the contract that says, hey, if I'm working with my team and I want to develop it, then I can get permission so I can continue working on the code base that we've started. Because there is a great opportunity for you guys to actually use this as a prototype for a much more complete game that you're going to sell, whether it's going to be on one of the app stores or maybe in another platform. You want to modify it so it works on Steam, on PC, or whatever, right? So please think about that as well. One thing that I always get feedback on is this consequences and corrective actions piece, which is like, hey, you know what? We're going to flag this guy for not being productive. But you know what ends up happening, guys? Here's what happens. We march along and we're inside of, the alpha release or the beta release. And then they say, that guy, Tom, he's just not working out, right? We need to get rid of him, right? Well, hold on a second. You didn't know that Tom wasn't working out when he was in Project Part 3 in First Playable? He probably was. There was things that you were seeing right then. He was ghosting you. He wasn't producing on time. Something was happening already. It's happening usually at the beginning. It doesn't, people who are not interested in doing the project or are being affected by things that aren't allowing them to produce. I got to be honest and say that too, right? That's right from the beginning. So that's what the peer review is there for. And also alert your instructor as soon as possible. That's me. Don't just sit there and wait for you to get to your final release and say, that guy Tom, he didn't do anything for the final release, the beta release, or the alpha release. What are you going to do? Nothing at that point. What am I going to do? Right? So notify me early and, we can kind of work with that person. Also, before you come to me and say something like, this guy Tom, he's not working out, right? Talk to Tom. Say, hey, Tom, you're not working. We expect you to do A and you're not delivering. And what's going on with you? Are you working too much? What's going on? Do you have a problem at home? Like, try and get information from the person. Be personable and try and, be empathetic a little bit too and try and figure out what they're doing, right? And if they make, promises to you, hold them to it. Say, okay, well, you promised me you're supposed to do it. I know you're busy, but, we have this project to take care of. And you know what? Maybe, you're not working out, right? Don't let me do it. Don't give me the dirty work to do. This is your team. You're forming it up. You take leadership. When someone's not working out, you let them know. Okay? I'll be there to help you, absolutely. But don't give me last minute. Like, final release, by the way, this guy Tom's not working out. Fix it. I can't. It's impossible, right? And remember, we're not in a work environment. You're all students, right? We're in a school environment. So you can't really fire anybody. I need time so that if something happens, I want to know as early as possible so I can shift that person. Maybe it's a personality conflict. Maybe that person can work okay in another team. So give me the chance to do that, guys. Don't, wait till the last minute is what I'm saying. And so going back to that contract, that's why this consequences and corrective actions piece is super important because it helps students, right? It helps you guys produce, right? Again, make sure you put your agreement in place as well. Notice your name. And when it comes to signatures, I've seen a lot of different ways of doing the signatures. People ask, well, how do I finish the signature? Because, I don't know what to do. Well, you can definitely use cursive and, put a signature. It's kind of like an agreement. It's not an official document. It's not a legal document, although it is an agreement between you and the team members, right? So you can certainly use the pro version of Adobe Acrobat and do digital signatures if you really want to here. You could turn it into that. Or you can just, take a picture of your signature and attach it as an image. There's lots of things. People mentioned earlier, you can use, kind of your tablet and draw your signature. You can do that too. It's really up to you how you want to do it, but there should be an acknowledgement at the end that says, yes, I agree. Yes, I've read this thing. Okay. Please don't do it for somebody else. The person should look through the document and agree. Don't say, yeah, sign it for me. That doesn't make sense. That means if that person says it to you, that's one of the people that might be the person that says, that guy Tom, man, he's not working out. It's like, you know what I'm saying? Because he doesn't care. If they don't care, if the person doesn't care about your contract, a red flag, man. They should care. They should care about everything that you guys do together. And I know this is just one project out of many, but guys, it's patterns. Remember, we're computer programmers at the end, right? At the very base, we're computer programmers. One of the things that classifies us and makes us different than everybody else is the ability for us to detect patterns, perceive patterns. We can perceive patterns not just in the computer side, on the software side, but with people, right? Take a look at those people. What are they doing? Are they producing? Past performance is equal to future performance. Remember that. All right, so that is your contract. Again, it's due this week. Please make sure you get it done as soon as possible. Okay, and submit it. So that is that piece. Remember that for your concept and game pitch. Okay, last thing. And I know some of you are great at doing it. There's some great speakers in this group right here that I can see. Some fantastic speakers, okay? And I can name some of them, like Eric. Eric is an amazing speaker. I gotta give Eric props. When it comes to him, doing PowerPoint presentations, I was always impressed by Eric from the very first, semester that I met him, right? And there's other people here that do awesome, kind of speeches and PowerPoints as well, right? There's people that are greatly organized in this group that I'm seeing right here. Guys, take advantage of those people. Guys who are awesome when it comes to tech, Hardik and Herman, and a bunch of other people that can be your lead software engineers. Associate those specialty tasks to those people. Michael, other people like that are awesome at doing what they need to do. And there's other people that are great at being generalists and support. There's nothing wrong with taking on one of those roles. Anything that everyone does together can work great to produce an awesome project. Remember, this is your last semester, last year. This is a chance for you to produce a portfolio piece, even if it's just the beginning of one. Okay, guys, that's my little pep talk. And that's all I wanted to talk about today. Please remember also, last thoughts before you go, that remember our Unity version. I talked about that earlier, but remember the Unity version that you're using is 2021.2.7F1. All right, so if you didn't happen to catch the lecture on Tuesday, that's the Unity version you have to use, okay? You don't have a peer review today. It's going to be by week, by your first release, which is going to be your first playable release. Justin, thanks so much. Thanks, Hardik. And thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop recording now, and I'm going to take questions. Okay, any questions?